In the maternity wing lobby of St. Matthew's Hospital, Eleanor Whitmore placed a suitcase at Kaylee Ford's feet and told her to leave. Nurses paused. A young couple waiting for discharge went silent. Kaylee, 7 months pregnant, held her ultrasound envelope against her coat as Eleanor's voice stayed calm, almost polite. This family will not be manipulated. James stood between them, confused, believing this was about stability, about protecting a name. No one in that lobby knew that 12 hours earlier, a $36 billion trust bearing Kaylee's name had been formally activated. They thought they were removing a burden. They were dismissing the only person who now held the power. If you believe silence is not weakness and that dignity can outlast humiliation, stay with this story. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from and your local time. I read every comment. And if stories about quiet strength and justice matter to you, consider subscribing. Some battles aren't loud, but they are worth witnessing. Kaylee Ford had always believed that silence could be a form of structure. Not surrender, not fear. Structure. At 29, she had built her life around routines that made her feel steady. Morning tea before checking email. A walk around the block before dinner. A small leather notebook kept in the second drawer of her nightstand. She had started that notebook long before she married James Whitmore. At first, it held grocery lists and fragments of thoughts. After the wedding, it began to hold timestamps. Nothing dramatic, just facts. March 3rd. Eleanor rearranged nursery without asking. March 9th. Vanessa at house past 9:40 p.m. work discussion. March 12th. James said, "You're overthinking." Kaylee did not write opinions, only events. The Whitmore house in Westchester was large enough to echo. High ceilings, pale marble floors, portraits of James's late father lining the hallway like a silent tribunal. Eleanor Whitmore moved through it like a curator guarding an inheritance museum. "This house runs on discipline," Eleanor liked to say. Discipline in her language meant order, control, predictability. Kaylee had tried in the beginning to interpret it generously. Eleanor had lost her husband young. She had raised James alone. Protectiveness could calcify into rigidity, but rigidity over time had turned into supervision. Eleanor questioned Kaylee's prenatal vitamins. She questioned the brand of crib Kaylee ordered. She questioned whether Kaylee should continue working part-time in public health consulting while pregnant. Rest, Eleanor would say, her tone coated in civility. A mother's first responsibility is stability. What she meant was, stay within reach. James at 33 was not unkind. That was the complexity. He worked long hours at an investment consulting firm in Manhattan. His phone was rarely silent. He had inherited his father's careful speech and his mother's aversion to confrontation. When tension surfaced between the two women in his life, he defaulted to mediation. "Mom just wants what's best," he would tell Kaylee in their bedroom, voice lowered, as if walls were informants. Kaylee would nod. She had learned early that arguing with James about Eleanor did not produce clarity. It produced fatigue. Vanessa Caldwell entered the rhythm of the house gradually. She was introduced at first as a professional asset, someone assisting James on a complex client portfolio. Early 30s, polished, impeccably dressed, even for casual meetings. Her laugh lingered a little too long in hallways. At first, Kaylee dismissed her discomfort as pregnancy sensitivity. Hormones could distort perception. She refused to become the stereotype of the suspicious wife. But she noticed patterns. Vanessa's car parked overnight because meetings ran late. 2 wine glasses left in James's office when Kaylee had gone to bed early. Calendar notifications labeled vaguely strategy review offsite. Kaylee did not confront. She documented. April 2nd. Vanessa arrived 6:15 p.m., left 11:52 p.m. April 5th. Eleanor praised Vanessa's ambition during dinner. Eleanor's approval was not subtle. "She understands legacy," Eleanor said once, glancing at Kaylee as though the word were a test. Legacy. The Whitmores treated it like a currency stronger than cash. Kaylee had never been impressed by legacy. She had been raised in Ohio by a single mother who worked double shifts as a nurse. Stability in her world meant paid bills and quiet evenings, not marble staircases. Still, she had tried to belong. She had moved into the Whitmore house after marriage, at Eleanor's insistence. It makes sense financially, James had reasoned. We'll save before buying our own place. But saving gradually transformed into postponing independence, and postponement slowly became permanence. Kaylee's pregnancy should have shifted the center of gravity. Instead, it intensified scrutiny. Eleanor insisted on attending prenatal appointments. She shouldn't go alone, she told James. It's family. Kaylee declined politely the first 2 times. The third time, Eleanor simply appeared in the car handbag already placed on the seat. In the examination room, Kaylee felt the absence of privacy like a draft. When the ultrasound technician dimmed the lights and the faint image of a heartbeat flickered onto the screen, Kaylee felt something anchor inside her. A quiet certainty, a future independent of the Whitmore surname. James squeezed her hand. For a moment, he looked uncomplicated, grateful, awed. But in the parking lot, Eleanor commented on hospital choice insurance coverage and whether Kaylee's stress levels were optimal. Kaylee wrote it down later that night. April 17th. Eleanor suggested my stress could affect baby. Tone implied blame. The notebook was not an act of war. It was a record against gaslighting. Because slowly, almost imperceptibly, Kaylee felt her own version of events being rewritten around her. You misheard, James would say gently. She didn't mean it that way. You're sensitive lately. Sensitivity became the explanation for everything. One evening, Kaylee came downstairs to find Vanessa seated at the kitchen island with Eleanor. They were reviewing something on a tablet property listings. For what, Kaylee asked, surprised. Eleanor looked up smoothly. Future planning. Vanessa smiled. Just exploring options. Investment diversification. James entered moments later, adjusting his cufflinks. He avoided Kaylee's eyes. Later in their bedroom, Kaylee asked directly, "Are you looking at properties with her?" "It's work," James said. "Mom thinks it's smart to expand. And I find out by accident." He sighed. It's not a secret. But it had felt like one. Kaylee did not press further. She waited until James showered, then opened her notebook. April 22nd property listings viewed with Vanessa plus Eleanor present. No prior discussion. The act of writing steadied her breathing, what none of them knew not. Eleanor with her iron composure, not Vanessa, with her calculated proximity, not even James with his uneasy loyalties, was that Kaylee's life extended beyond the Whitmore house in ways they had never considered worth asking about. Her Aunt Victoria Ford had been an anomaly in the family. Brilliant, reclusive, known within certain financial circles though rarely discussed at holiday dinners. Victoria had funded scholarships anonymously. She had once told Kaylee when Kaylee was 19 and overwhelmed by tuition debt, "Security is not noise, it's design." Kaylee had not fully understood the weight of that sentence then. Now, as she placed the notebook back into its drawer, she sensed design unfolding quietly beneath visible conflict. The voicemail from Harrison and Blythe LLP still sat unheard by the rest of the house. The message that had come while she was inside that dim ultrasound room, watching a small heartbeat flicker. She had listened to it alone later that evening in the garage, seated in the driver's seat of her car. "Miss Ford, this is regarding the estate of Victoria Ford. Please contact us at your earliest convenience to discuss activation procedures." Activation. The word had settled over her like a horizon line. She had not told James yet, not because she wanted leverage, but because she needed clarity first. In the Whitmore household, information traveled upward to Eleanor before it settled anywhere else. Kaylee was not ready for that storm. Instead, she saved the voicemail. She screenshotted the call log. She noted the date. April 17th, Harrison and Blythe LLP. Estate activation. Upstairs, laughter drifted faintly from James's office. Vanessa's voice threaded through it. Kaylee rested her hand over her stomach. Her child shifted small and certain. Structure, she reminded herself. Silence was not surrender. It was preparation. The morning Kaylee returned the call to Harrison and Blythe LLP, the house was unusually quiet. Eleanor had left early for a charity board meeting. James was already on the train to Manhattan. Vanessa, according to the shared family calendar, was scheduled for a client lunch. Kaylee waited until the front door closed behind Eleanor before dialing the number. She sat at the kitchen table, notebook open, pen aligned carefully along the margin. Outside, spring sunlight traced thin lines across the marble floor. Miss Ford, the receptionist's tone, shifted once Kaylee confirmed her identity. "Please hold for Mr. Daniel Harper." Daniel Harper's voice was calm, deliberate. "Miss Ford, I'm sorry for your loss. Your Aunt Victoria Ford passed away 3 weeks ago." Kaylee absorbed the sentence without outward reaction. Victoria had been private. Their contact had been infrequent but intentional annual visits, thoughtful emails, no extravagance. Still, loss was loss. "I understand," Kaylee replied softly. "There are documents naming you as sole beneficiary of a trust and several associated holdings. We need to complete verification in person. Given the scale of the estate, confidentiality is essential." Scale. Daniel did not say the number on the phone. Kaylee wrote, "May 2nd sole beneficiary. In-person verification required." "When can you come in?" he asked. She checked her prenatal appointment schedule automatically. "Tomorrow morning. Bring identification and discretion." The line disconnected. Kaylee closed her notebook and sat still for a moment longer than necessary. Not from shock, from a recalibration. The Whitmore house felt different now, not smaller, but less permanent. Upstairs in James's office, a framed photograph of his father rested on the bookshelf. Eleanor often paused there, fingers grazing the frame, as if drawing instruction from it. Legacy. Victoria Ford had never spoken about legacy in that tone. She had spoken about stewardship. There was a difference. When James came home that evening, his mood was brittle. "Mom said you seemed distracted today," he said while loosening his tie. "I had a phone call. From who, a law firm?" James paused. "About what?" Lately watched his face carefully, not searching for guilt, searching for reflex. "My aunt's estate," she said. He blinked, processing. "I didn't even know she was sick." She wasn't publicly. He stepped closer. "Is everything okay?" "Yes." That answer was technically accurate. James hesitated. "Mom saw a missed call earlier this week. She was worried." "About what?" "That you were handling something alone." Kaylee felt the familiar inversion, the subtle suggestion that independence equaled secrecy. "I am handling it," she replied evenly. James nodded, but unease lingered in his posture. "Do you want me there?" At that, Kaylee studied him more closely. Did she? If James attended the meeting, Eleanor would know within an hour. Vanessa might know sooner. Information moved through James like current through wire. "No," Kaylee said gently. "It's preliminary." James exhaled as if relieved. "Okay, just keep me in the loop." Loop. She wrote it down later. May 2nd, James requested inclusion. Tone neutral, mild tension. The next morning, Kaylee drove into Manhattan alone. The offices of Harrison and Blythe occupied 3 floors of a glass tower overlooking the Hudson. The lobby smelled faintly of polished wood and restraint. Daniel Harper greeted her in person, early 40s, controlled expression. He did not offer false warmth. In a private conference room, documents were laid out in precise stacks. Victoria Ford's signature appeared steady across multiple pages. Daniel began. "Your aunt structured her holdings through a layered trust system, real estate equities controlling shares in several multinational funds. Total estimated value at current market assessment, $36.4 billion. He did not pause for effect. Kaylee did not flinch. She wrote the number down carefully, as if transcribing a laboratory result. 36.4B estimated. Activation occurred automatically upon her death. Daniel continued. However, public disclosure is avoidable if we manage this correctly. What does correctly mean? Kaylee asked. It means limiting information flow. It means anticipating legal vulnerabilities, particularly in marital contexts. Marital contexts. Daniel's eyes rested on her left hand where her wedding band caught the light. Your aunt included a clause safeguarding any assets from claims not directly tied to you or your biological descendants. Kaylee placed her palm gently over her abdomen. So the trust is insulated, she asked. Yes, provided we maintain procedural discipline. Discipline. The word echoed Eleanor's frequent declaration, "This house runs on discipline." But here, discipline meant protection. Daniel slid another document forward. We also need to discuss potential external pressures once information becomes public. Family disputes often escalate when numbers of this scale are involved. Kaylee considered the Whitmore dining room table. Eleanor at the head, Vanessa to the right, James somewhere between loyalty and avoidance. They don't know, Kaylee said quietly. For now, Daniel replied. Verification required signatures, copies of identification, a biometric confirmation process that felt clinical rather than ceremonial. No champagne, no applause, just paperwork. As she left the office, the city seemed indifferent to the transfer of billions. Traffic moved. Pedestrians crossed streets. A street vendor argued about change. Kaylee returned to Westchester before James did. Eleanor was waiting in the foyer. You were out this morning, she said, coat still draped over her arm. Yes, at the law firm. Kaylee met her gaze without defiance. Yes, Eleanor's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. I assume this concerns money. It concerns my aunt's estate. Eleanor stepped closer. And what exactly does that entail? Formalities. Eleanor's eyes sharpened. Marriage does not mean secrecy. Kaylee noticed the framing immediately. Secrecy, as if information were communal property. It also does not eliminate autonomy, Kaylee replied softly. Eleanor's jaw tightened. James entered minutes later, tension rising like static in the air. Everything okay? He asked. Your wife visited a law firm without informing the family? Eleanor answered before Kaylee could speak. James looked at Kaylee. I thought you said it was preliminary. It is. So why the defensiveness? Eleanor interjected. Kaylee felt the familiar gravitational pull conversation shifting from content to tone. I am not defensive, she said. I am handling paperwork. Paperwork, Eleanor repeated, as if testing the word for deception. That night, laughter again filtered from James's office. Vanessa had arrived shortly after dinner. Eleanor lingered longer than usual. Kaylee remained in the nursery assembling a crib she had ordered without Eleanor's approval. Each screw tightened felt like an assertion. May 3rd confrontation in foyer. Eleanor equated autonomy with secrecy. Her phone vibrated with an email from Daniel, subject confirmation complete. Confidentiality protocol initiated. Kaylee read it twice. In another part of the house, Vanessa's heels clicked across marble. None of them yet understood that the axis of power had already shifted. Not loudly, not visibly, but irrevocably. Kaylee closed her notebook, placed it back in the drawer, and turned off the light. Structure, preparation, silence. Eleanor Whitmore believed that authority was best exercised before it was questioned. The morning after Kaylee's visit to Harrison and Blythe, Eleanor began reorganizing the nursery. She did not ask. She did not announce it. Kaylee returned from a short walk to find the pale oak crib she had assembled pushed 2 feet closer to the window. The rocking chair had been replaced with a high-backed antique from storage. The soft gray curtains Kaylee had chosen were gone, folded neatly on the dresser, substituted with heavier cream drapes Eleanor described as more appropriate. Sunlight fades fabric, Eleanor said when Kaylee stepped into the doorway. Kaylee rested her hand against her stomach, steadying herself before speaking. I positioned the crib away from the window for safety, she said calmly. Eleanor adjusted a porcelain lamp on the changing table. We raised James with sunlight in his room. He thrived. Kaylee nodded once. This was how it happened. Authority disguised as nostalgia. James stood in the hall watching the exchange without entering it. Mom has experience, he offered lightly. Maybe we can compromise. Compromise implied two equal positions. Kaylee did not argue. She moved the crib back after Eleanor left the room. That night she wrote, May 4th nursery rearranged without consent. Safety concerns dismissed. The notebook's pages were beginning to thicken with evidence of small invasions. None dramatic enough to alarm an outsider. Together they formed a pattern. Vanessa's presence in the house expanded in similar increments. She began arriving earlier sometimes before James returned from work. I had to drop off files, she would say, already removing her coat. Eleanor welcomed her with a familiarity that no longer felt accidental. You must stay for dinner. Eleanor insisted one evening, placing an extra setting at the table without consulting Kaylee. Kaylee observed the seating arrangement that night. Eleanor at the head, James to her right, Vanessa beside James. Kaylee across from them, framed by silence. Conversation centered around investment opportunities and long-term positioning. Eleanor asked Vanessa's opinion on market volatility. James deferred to Vanessa's expertise with visible admiration. And what do you think, Kaylee? Eleanor asked, finally tone-polished but pointed. Kaylee understood the subtext. She was being tested. I think stability is built slowly, she replied, in all areas. Vanessa smiled thinly. Markets reward boldness. Eleanor nodded approvingly. Later, as dishes clinked in the sink, Kaylee found 2 wine glasses again in James's office. She did not confront him. Instead, she opened the shared financial app on her phone. There were small charges she had not noticed before. Restaurant bills labeled as client meetings. Ride services billed late at night. A boutique hotel expense listed under business development. The amounts were not catastrophic, but they were consistent. May 6th, joint account $1 $820 restaurant plus $460 hotel, labeled business. Kaylee knew better than to accuse without documentation. The following afternoon, Eleanor called Kaylee into the sitting room. I've been thinking, Eleanor began, folding her hands with deliberate elegance. Pregnancy can make women emotionally reactive. Kaylee waited. I worry that stress from external distractions, Eleanor paused, meaningfully could compromise the baby. External distractions. Kaylee recognized the attempt to redefine her law firm visit as instability. I'm following medical advice, Kaylee replied. And whose advice is that? Eleanor pressed. Your public health colleagues, my obstetrician. Eleanor's gaze hardened almost imperceptibly. James is under significant pressure. Introducing financial complications into a marriage can be destabilizing. Kaylee understood then that Eleanor's concern was not the baby. It was control. Any assets related to my aunt are separate, Kaylee said evenly. Eleanor's composure faltered for a fraction of a second. Separate. Yes. James entered mid-conversation. What's separate? He asked. Kaylee met his eyes. My aunt's estate. Eleanor rose smoothly. I was simply advising Kaylee that transparency strengthens marriage. James looked between them, unease building. You said it was preliminary, he reminded Kaylee. It is being handled, she answered. Handled how Eleanor demanded. With legal counsel. The word counsel altered the atmosphere. Eleanor inhaled slowly. Legal counsel implies adversarial positioning. It implies structure, Kaylee corrected. James ran a hand through his hair. Why does everything have to be formal? Because informality had never favored her, Kaylee thought. But she did not say it. Instead, she said, because clarity prevents misunderstanding. That evening, Vanessa arrived carrying a folder. Market projections, she explained to James. Kaylee noticed Eleanor watching her with quiet approval. After dinner, Kaylee passed James's office and heard her own name. She's isolating you. Vanessa's voice said low but distinct. Secrecy is a red flag. Kaylee paused just beyond the doorway. James responded uncertain. She's just cautious. She doesn't trust you, Vanessa replied gently. And trust is everything. Kaylee felt the inversion settle again. Caution rebranded as distrust. Autonomy reframed as manipulation. She stepped away before they noticed her presence. Later, in the privacy of the bedroom, she did not mention what she had overheard. Instead, she asked James a simpler question. "Do you believe I'm isolating you?" James hesitated. "I think he said carefully that we should be on the same page." "We can be," she answered, "but being on the same page requires both of us reading the same document." He frowned slightly, not fully grasping the metaphor. Kaylee wrote, May 8th. Overheard Vanessa. She's isolating you. Narrative forming. The following week, Eleanor escalated her involvement in practical matters. She contacted the obstetrician's office to confirm appointment times for scheduling coordination. She requested access to insurance statements. She suggested that Kaylee consider signing a prenuptial amendment for everyone's protection. Protection from what Kaylee asked. "Future misunderstandings," Eleanor replied. James stood nearby, silent. That silence was louder than accusation. Kaylee emailed Daniel Harper that evening. Subject: inquiry regarding marital financial protections. She outlined Eleanor's suggestion. She attached screenshots of the joint account charges. She requested formal bank records. Daniel's reply was swift. "We will request certified statements. Do not confront. Preserve all communication. Preserve." Kaylee appreciated that word. It implied safeguarding, not attacking. She began organizing a digital folder labeled Documentation. Inside it, voicemail transcript from Harrison and Blythe. Email confirmation of trust activation. Screenshots of joint account transactions. Notes from her notebook transcribed with dates. She was not building a weapon. She was building a shield. Downstairs, laughter echoed again, Vanessa's voice blending with Eleanor's. Kaylee closed her laptop and placed both hands over her abdomen. The baby shifted stronger now. There was a quiet, growing certainty inside her that the house she currently occupied was temporary. Not because she had been pushed yet, but because it had already ceased to be neutral ground. Eleanor believed she controlled outcomes through discipline. Vanessa believed proximity translated into permanence. James believed conflict could be delayed indefinitely. Kaylee knew something they did not. Paper trails accumulate weight, and weight eventually shifts balance. She turned off the bedroom light. In the dark, structure felt less like defense and more like inevitability. The first email from the Private Banking Compliance Division arrived at 6:12 a.m. Kaylee was already awake. Pregnancy had shifted her sleep into fragments 2 hours at a time, separated by stillness and thought. She lay in the dim gray of early morning, James asleep beside her, and watched the notification light up her phone screen. Subject: verification of asset transfer confidential. She did not open it immediately. Instead, she slid out of bed, carefully padded down the hallway, and settled at the kitchen table where the house cameras could not capture her screen. Eleanor had installed those cameras 2 years ago for security. Kaylee had never liked the way security sometimes meant surveillance. She opened the email. The language was sterile. Pursuant to the activation of the Victoria Ford Living Trust, please confirm receipt of the following transfer instruments. There were attachments, encrypted PDFs requiring secondary authentication. Kaylee wrote the time down in her notebook before clicking anything. May 12th, 6:12 a.m. Compliance verification email received. She followed the instructions, methodically logging into a secure portal Daniel Harper had previously authorized. The figures displayed were no longer abstract estimates spoken in a conference room. They were real. Lines of holdings, equity shares, real estate portfolios across 3 continents, liquid capital allocations, total valuation adjusted overnight to $36.8 billion due to market fluctuations. The number did not make her heart race. What moved her instead was the clause Daniel had emphasized. Primary beneficiary Kaylee Ford. Secondary contingent beneficiary biological issue of Kaylee Ford. Her child was protected before it had taken its first breath. Kaylee closed the portal and printed nothing. Paper left trails. Digital encryption left fewer. She deleted the email notification from her phone display, though not from the server. Then she composed a short reply to Daniel. Verification complete. Please proceed with confidentiality protocol. His response came within minutes. Understood. Additionally, we recommend immediate separation of personal marital accounts from trust-related structures. Formal documentation attached. Kaylee stared at the phrase separation of personal marital accounts. The joint account she shared with James held modest funds compared to the trust. Yet, its activity had grown increasingly irregular. She opened the banking app again. 3 new charges had posted overnight. Luxury retailer $2, $940 private dining, $1, $120 transportation, $780. All marked under James's corporate reimbursement category. Kaylee took screenshots. May 12th, additional charges totaling $4, $840. Pattern escalating. Footsteps echoed from the staircase. She locked her phone just as Eleanor entered the kitchen. "You're up early," Eleanor observed. "So are you." Eleanor poured herself coffee with the precision of someone accustomed to ownership. "I received an email notification from the shared insurance account. A billing adjustment." Kaylee knew that tone. Phishing. "It was unrelated," Kaylee said calmly. Eleanor stirred her coffee slowly. "James mentioned you were communicating with lawyers again." Kaylee did not ask how James had phrased it. She could imagine. "Yes." "For what purpose?" "To complete formalities." Eleanor set the spoon down sharply. "Marriage is not a corporate merger, Kaylee." "No," Kaylee agreed. "But finances are not emotions." The air thickened. Eleanor leaned against the counter. "If there is money involved, the Whitmore name is implicated." There it was, not concern for Kaylee. Concern for association? "Not in this case," Kaylee replied. Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly. "Explain." Kaylee met her gaze without hostility. "It is structured separately." Silence settled like dust. Eleanor straightened. "That sounds like a mistake." "It is not." Eleanor left the kitchen without finishing her coffee. Kaylee recorded the exchange after she was alone. May 12th. Eleanor expressed objection to separation. Concern Whitmore name not implicated. Later that afternoon, Vanessa arrived earlier than usual. Kaylee was in the living room reviewing prenatal nutrition notes when Vanessa entered without knocking. "James said I could grab some files," Vanessa explained breezily. "Of course," Kaylee replied. Vanessa paused, studying her. "You seem busy lately." "I am." "With lawyers?" Vanessa added lightly. Kaylee looked up. "Yes." Vanessa crossed her arms. "It's just sudden. Estate matters often are." Vanessa's smile thinned. "Estate matters can complicate marriages." "So can assumptions," Kaylee said gently. Vanessa held her gaze a second longer than necessary before turning toward James's office. Kaylee wrote the interaction down, word for word, once Vanessa disappeared upstairs. May 12th. Vanessa probing re-lawyers. Tone insinuating. That evening, James approached Kaylee in the nursery. "I feel like I'm missing something," he admitted. Kaylee adjusted a folded blanket in the crib. "What would you like to know? Why everything is so compartmentalized?" She turned to face him. "Because clarity requires compartments." That sounds like something a lawyer would say. It sounds like something someone protecting herself would say. James exhaled, frustration surfacing. From me, Kaylee did not answer immediately. She stepped closer instead. "From instability?" she said softly. James searched her face for accusation and found none. That unsettled him more. "Are you planning to leave?" he asked suddenly. The question hung between them. "I am planning to be prepared," Kaylee answered. "For what?" "For whatever happens." James ran a hand over his face. "Mom thinks you're positioning yourself. Positioning how? As if you don't trust us." Kaylee absorbed the plural. "Us." She nodded slowly. "Trust is built on transparency. I've been transparent." "Have you?" she asked quietly. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Neither of them mentioned Vanessa. Later, when James showered, Kaylee opened her laptop and initiated the formal request Daniel had drafted, certified bank statements for the past 6 months of the joint account. The form required both signatures. She signed electronically. She left James's signature line pending. She did not mention it. The next morning, an alert pinged her phone. James had signed, perhaps without reading, perhaps believing it routine. Kaylee saved the confirmation. May 13th, certified bank record request authorized by both parties. Downstairs, Eleanor was speaking on the phone. "Yes," she said in a low voice. "We may need to consider adjustments to property titles." Kaylee paused at the top of the stairs listening. "No, not yet. I need clarity first. Property titles." Kaylee's pulse remained steady. Eleanor was preparing too. But preparation without documentation was noise. Daniel's email arrived by afternoon. Certified statements expected within 48 hours. Advise no confrontation until review complete. Kaylee closed her eyes briefly. She did not feel triumphant. She felt inevitable. The Whitmore house continued its rhythm dinners, meetings the steady click of Vanessa's heels on marble. But beneath that rhythm, numbers were aligning. Transactions were time-stamped. Statements would arrive. Eleanor believed authority derived from presence. Vanessa believed influence derived from proximity. James believed avoidance preserved peace. Kaylee understood something quieter. Paper does not raise its voice. It waits. And when presented at the right moment, it does not argue. It concludes. She placed her notebook back into the drawer and rested her hand once more over the life growing inside her. Preparation was nearly complete. They still believed she was reacting. They did not yet realize she was structuring. The day Eleanor Whitmore chose to remove Kaylee from the house began with a routine prenatal appointment. The air was cool, edged with late spring rain. James drove one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting absently on the console between them. He had been quiet all morning, distracted by emails he checked at stoplights. Kaylee watched the landscape blur past the window and felt the baby shift steadily beneath her palm. 30 weeks, viable, strong. In the examination room, the obstetrician spoke in measured reassurance. The baby's heartbeat was consistent. Growth on track, blood pressure stable. "You're doing well," the doctor said. Kaylee nodded. She was. Whatever chaos circulated beyond her body, inside it, there was order. James squeezed her hand again when the heartbeat filled the dimmed room. For a brief moment, the world narrowed to sound and light and something uncomplicated. Then his phone vibrated. He stepped into the hallway to answer it. Kaylee didn't need to guess who it was. When they exited the clinic, Eleanor was waiting near the hospital entrance. She stood upright despite the drizzle coat-buttoned umbrella closed at her side. "I thought I'd meet you," she said as they approached. James looked startled. "Mom, how did you share your calendar?" she replied simply. Kaylee felt the first shift of unease. Eleanor's gaze traveled over her clinical rather than concerned. "How did it go?" Healthy Kaylee answered. "Good," Eleanor said, "because stability is about to become even more important." James frowned. "What does that mean?" Eleanor gestured toward the parking lot. "Let's talk at home." But they did not make it home first. In the maternity wing lobby, beneath muted lighting and the soft echo of hospital announcements, Eleanor stopped walking. "I won't pretend this is easy," she began. Kaylee felt the room tilt, not physically, but socially. Conversations nearby softened. A nurse glanced over briefly. "Mom," James said quietly. "What are you doing?" "I am protecting this family," Eleanor replied. She turned to Kaylee. "You have been engaging lawyers without consultation. You are separating finances. You are destabilizing this household during a pregnancy." Kaylee held her ultrasound envelope against her coat. "I am following legal advice," she said calmly. "That is precisely the problem," Eleanor answered. James looked between them, confusion spreading across his face. "We talked about this. It's just paperwork." "Paperwork," Eleanor repeated. "Paperwork that isolates my son from decisions affecting his own household." Kaylee recognized the reframing instantly. "Isolation. Again, I have not isolated anyone," she said. Eleanor stepped closer, lowering her voice, but not enough to avoid witnesses. You will not weaponize external money to fracture this family. James blinked. Weaponize, Mom. No one said. Eleanor turned to him sharply. You are too close to see what is happening. A young couple seated nearby fell silent. A nurse slowed her pace, hovering at a respectful distance. Kaylee's voice remained even. There is no weapon, she said. Only structure. Eleanor's composure hardened. You are no longer welcome in my home until this is clarified. The words settled like glass. James stared at his mother. Mom. Eleanor did not look at him. You may collect your belongings this afternoon, she continued, eyes fixed on Kaylee, but I will not allow instability under my roof. Kaylee felt the baby move again, strong, insistent. She did not raise her voice. James, she said quietly. He looked torn, trapped between reflex and reality. Maybe we just need time, he offered weakly, to cool down. Eleanor nodded, as if this confirmed her reasoning. Yes, time. Time away. Vanessa emerged from the hospital cafe at that exact moment holding 2 cups of coffee. The choreography was precise enough to feel rehearsed. Oh, Vanessa said softly, stopping short as if surprised. Is everything okay? Eleanor accepted one of the coffees. It will be, she said. Kaylee observed the alignment without commentary. James looked at Vanessa, then at his mother, then at his wife. I didn't know she was coming, he said quickly. Kaylee believed him, but belief did not alter outcome. Eleanor reached into her handbag and withdrew a folded set of keys. These are the spare keys to the guest suite, she said, handing them to James. Vanessa will need workspace privacy while assisting you during this transition. Transition. Kaylee understood the declaration embedded within the word. Vanessa lowered her eyes, performing reluctance. I don't want to intrude, she murmured. You're not intruding, Eleanor replied. You're supporting stability. James's breathing had grown shallow. This isn't necessary, he insisted. It is, Eleanor said firmly, until Kaylee demonstrates full transparency. Kaylee realized then that nothing she said in this lobby would alter the direction already chosen. So she shifted. She turned toward the reception desk. May I have copies of today's visit summary and ultrasound imaging? She asked the nurse. The nurse nodded, glancing uncertainly between the adults. James stepped closer. Kaylee, don't escalate this. I'm not, she replied softly. She accepted the envelope and placed it carefully into her bag. Eleanor watched the movement, interpreting it as defiance. You see, she said to James, preparation. Kaylee met Eleanor's gaze. Yes, she said, preparation. Not for confrontation, for inevitability. Outside rain intensified. James walked beside Kaylee toward the car. Just stay with a friend for a few days, he urged. Let me talk to her. Kaylee opened the passenger door slowly. Will you? She asked. Of course. She studied his face, searching for conviction rather than comfort. I hope so, she said. Vanessa and Eleanor remained near the entrance silhouettes against hospital glass. Kaylee felt no surge of humiliation, only clarity. They believed they were expelling risk. They did not yet understand that they were accelerating documentation. She drove herself away from St. Matthew's Hospital that afternoon. Not to a friend's house, but to an extended stay hotel Daniel Harper's office had discreetly recommended for clients requiring privacy. As she checked in, she wrote in her notebook, May 18th, public removal. Witnesses present, Vanessa aligned with Eleanor, James passive. She underlined one word, passive. Upstairs, in a neutral room that smelled faintly of detergent and distance, Kaylee placed the ultrasound envelope on the bedside table. She sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself one slow breath. She had not cried. She did not need to, because beneath the humiliation Eleanor intended to inflict, something else had crystallized. Separation had been declared publicly, and public declarations leave records. Vanessa would move into the Whitmore house by nightfall. Eleanor would interpret silence as retreat. James would tell himself this was temporary. Kaylee opened her laptop. She drafted a short email to Daniel Harper. Subject, immediate development, relocation. In the body, she wrote only facts. Removed from marital residence in public setting. Witnesses present. Request guidance on next legal steps. She pressed send. Outside rain continued to fall, steady and partial. Inside the hotel room, Kaylee rested her hand over her abdomen once more. Preparation had shifted into motion. And somewhere in encrypted accounts and certified statements soon to arrive, the weight of truth was assembling. They believed she had nowhere to stand. They were mistaken. The extended stay hotel overlooked a stretch of interstate that never truly slept. Headlights moved in steady ribbons below Kaylee's window, red and white lines threading through darkness, with mechanical certainty. The room itself was neutral beige carpet small kitchenette, a desk bolted to the wall. No portraits of Whitmore ancestors, no marble floors, no audience. Kaylee slept more deeply that first night than she had in weeks. In the morning, she reviewed Daniel Harper's reply. We will proceed carefully. First, ensure your physical safety and document all communication. Second, we schedule in-person consultation today. Third, do not respond emotionally to outreach. Preserve everything. Preserve everything. Kaylee showered, dressed in a simple navy maternity dress, and drove into Manhattan once more. Harrison and Blythe's conference room felt unchanged, quiet temperature controlled immune to domestic turbulence. Daniel greeted her with the same measured composure. I read your email, he began. Public removal with witnesses is significant. Kaylee placed her notebook on the table and opened to the latest entry. St. Matthew's Hospital. Approximately 10:40 a.m. nurse present. At least one couple seated nearby. Daniel nodded. Good. Names if possible later. We can request security footage through formal channels. Kaylee absorbed that calmly. We will also initiate documentation of marital separation, Daniel continued. Not necessarily divorce, but legal acknowledgement of changed residence and potential harassment. Kaylee folded her hands. I am not interested in retaliation, she said. That is clear, Daniel replied. But protection is not retaliation. He slid a document toward her. Temporary protective filing draft. This does not accuse, Daniel explained. It establishes boundaries. Kaylee scanned the language. Public expulsion from residence while pregnant. Potential emotional distress. Request for non-interference and formal communication channels. The words were sterile. Accurate. I will sign, she said. Daniel continued. Regarding the trust, this development reinforces the need for confidentiality. If they suspect significant assets, behavior may escalate. They already suspect money, Kaylee said quietly. Do they know scale? No. Daniel's gaze sharpened slightly. Then it must remain that way. He outlined next steps. Separate mailing address registered to the trust. Bank accounts restructured under protected holding entities. Communication through counsel only regarding any financial inquiries. Kaylee asked questions, methodically clarifying timeline, jurisdiction, and procedural safeguards for her unborn child. Daniel noticed the absence of theatrics. You are handling this remarkably, he observed. Kaylee closed her notebook. I am handling it, she corrected gently. When she left the office, her phone vibrated repeatedly. Missed calls from James. 3 voicemails. She did not listen immediately. Instead, she drove back to the hotel, parked, and sat in the stillness of the vehicle before pressing play. James's voice filled the space. Kaylee, Mom didn't mean for it to happen like that. Pause. She's just worried. Another pause. Vanessa's only here temporarily. Please don't make this bigger than it is. Kaylee replayed the final sentence twice. Don't make this bigger. She wrote it down. May 19th. James, don't make this bigger than it is. The second voicemail carried tension. Mom says if you're involving lawyers, we need to review property titles. The third was softer. I just want you home. Kaylee saved all 3. She typed a brief text in response. I am safe. All communication regarding residence or finances should go through counsel for now. She did not add accusation. She did not add emotion. Minutes later, Eleanor called. Kaylee let it ring. A text followed. "You are overreacting. Return home, and we can resolve this privately." Kaylee forwarded the message to Daniel without comment. By afternoon, an email arrived from Daniel's office addressed to both James and Eleanor. "Please direct all future correspondence regarding Kaylee Ford's residence finances or well-being through our office. This request is for clarity and protection during temporary separation." Kaylee imagined the Whitmore dining room when that email appeared. Eleanor reading it first, James watching, Vanessa present. The shift from domestic conflict to legal procedure would feel like escalation to them. To Kaylee, it felt like alignment. That evening, Naomi Pierce visited the hotel. Naomi had been Kaylee's friend since graduate school, direct perceptive and nurse at a nearby hospital. "I saw the security logs," Naomi said after embracing her carefully. "Your mother-in-law was loud." Kaylee looked up. "You were on shift, I was." Naomi sat across from her. "There's footage." Kaylee's pulse did not spike. "Is it preserved?" she asked. Naomi nodded. "Hospital policy retains for 30 days unless formally requested." Kaylee opened her laptop and drafted another email to Daniel. Subject: CCTV, potential St. Matthew S. Facts only. Naomi watched her type. "You're not angry?" Naomi asked gently. Kaylee considered the question. "I am aware," she answered. Naomi studied her for a long moment. "They humiliated you?" "Yes. And you're just documenting." Kaylee closed the laptop. "Anger doesn't certify records." Naomi exhaled slowly. "Remind me never to underestimate you." Back at the Whitmore house, Vanessa unpacked into the guest suite. Eleanor supervised discreetly satisfaction, tucked behind composure. James moved through rooms with restless energy, calling Kaylee twice more without answer. He told himself the lawyers were precautionary. He told himself Kaylee would return once tempers cooled. He did not yet grasp that something fundamental had shifted. Kaylee, meanwhile, reviewed the preliminary certified bank statements Daniel's office had expedited. The pattern was no longer subtle. Frequent high-value expenditures labeled as corporate reimbursements, but routed through personal channels. 2 transfers to an account, partially masked, initials VC Vanessa Caldwell. Kaylee wrote it down. May 20th, transfer to VC $8,500 consulting reimbursement. She did not circle it. She did not underline it. She simply recorded. Daniel's follow-up email arrived late that evening. "We recommend immediate formal separation filing to secure financial boundaries before disclosure of trust scale becomes inevitable." Kaylee read the sentence twice. Inevitable. She placed her hand over her abdomen once more. Her child shifted in steady rhythm. "I am not retaliating," she murmured softly into the quiet room. "I am stabilizing." Outside, traffic flowed without interruption. Inside, documentation accumulated weight. Eleanor believed she had removed instability from her home. Vanessa believed proximity ensured permanence. James believed reconciliation was a matter of timing. Kaylee understood something else. When separation is declared publicly, consequences follow formally. She closed her notebook and turned off the light. In the darkness, she did not feel abandoned. She felt positioned. The certified bank records arrived 48 hours later in a sealed digital file transmitted directly to Daniel Harper's office. Kaylee reviewed them in the same conference room where she had first heard the number 36.4 billion spoken without emotion. The statements covered 6 months. Line by line, date, merchant, amount, authorization method. The pattern that had once felt like suspicion now appeared structural. Daniel projected the transactions onto a screen. "Notice frequency," he said calmly. Kaylee leaned forward slightly. Restaurant charges clustered around evenings Vanessa had been at the house. Ride services corresponding to late departures. Hotel expenditures labeled as client development, but processed through the joint marital account before reimbursement. "That alone isn't illegal," Daniel clarified. "But it establishes commingling." Kaylee nodded. Now this, Daniel continued enlarging a specific entry. "Electronic transfer. $8,500. Authorized by J. Whitmore Destination Caldwell Consulting, LLC. Vanessa Caldwell had formed an LLC. Consulting, Kaylee said softly. Daniel's expression remained neutral. Yes. Is that improper? Not inherently. But if marital funds are being redirected without your informed consent, particularly during pregnancy, that becomes relevant. Kaylee wrote the word down. May 22nd. Transfer to Caldwell Consulting, LLC. $8,500. Daniel continued scrolling. There were 3 similar transfers over 4 months. Total $26,300. Not catastrophic relative to the trust, but meaningful within a marriage built on shared accounts. Kaylee did not react outwardly. She asked instead, "What is the proper procedure?" "We send formal inquiry through counsel," Daniel replied. "We request explanation and documentation. We do not accuse. We ask. And if explanation is unsatisfactory, then it becomes part of a broader filing." Kaylee folded her hands. "There is also this," Daniel added, clicking to another section. Property tax payments for the Whitmore residence had been shifted recently from a family trust to a personal line of credit under James's name. "Why would that matter?" Kaylee asked. "Because it suggests financial restructuring," Daniel answered. "Often done in anticipation of asset reallocation." Kaylee understood immediately. Eleanor. She was repositioning property titles. Preparing. Daniel looked at Kaylee steadily. "Given your current status, I recommend filing for temporary legal separation immediately. It secures financial boundaries before additional movement occurs." Kaylee did not hesitate. Drafted. Back at the hotel, Kaylee organized her documentation into categories: financial transfers, public expulsion witnesses, communication records, prenatal medical documentation. Her process was clinical. She attached the 3 voicemail files from James to a folder labeled Tone Indicators. She transcribed Eleanor's text messages word for word. "You are overreacting. Return home and we can resolve privately." Privately meant without record. Kaylee understood that now with clarity. Later that evening, James appeared in the hotel lobby unannounced. The front desk called up to her room. "There's a Mr. Whitmore asking to see you." Kaylee paused before answering. "I'll come down." She did not invite him upstairs. In the lobby, James looked exhausted. "You didn't tell me where you were staying," he said immediately. "For privacy. Privacy from me." "For clarity," she corrected. He exhaled sharply. "Lawyers' separation filings, Kaylee, this is escalating." "Public removal from residence was escalation," she said calmly. James ran a hand through his hair. Mom was emotional. She was deliberate. "That's not fair." Kaylee held his gaze. Was Vanessa scheduled to be at the hospital that morning? James hesitated. She was meeting a client nearby. At the hospital cafe, silence. "That wasn't planned," he insisted. Kaylee did not argue. She asked instead, "Did you authorize transfers to Caldwell Consulting?" James stiffened. "That's business. From our joint account, it was reimbursed. Documentation, I can get it." Kaylee nodded. "Please send it to Daniel Harper." His expression shifted. "You're really doing this?" "I'm following procedure." James lowered his voice. "You're acting like I betrayed you." Kaylee considered the statement carefully. "I'm acting like documentation matters." "That's cold." "No," she replied softly. "It's clear." He looked at her as if seeing something unfamiliar. "Is this about money?" he asked suddenly. Kaylee's face remained unchanged. "No." James stepped closer. "If there's something significant, we should handle it together." There it was again, together. She studied him for a long moment. "When I was asked to leave," she said quietly, "where were we?" James had no answer that satisfied even himself. Back at the Whitmore house. Eleanor read Daniel Harper's formal inquiry letter that evening. Request for explanation regarding transfers to Caldwell Consulting, LLC. Request for clarification on property title restructuring. Eleanor's lips thinned. "This is adversarial," she said sharply. Vanessa sat across from her, posture composed. It's precautionary, Vanessa replied. If she has outside counsel, she's positioning. James stood near the window, phone in hand. She says it's about clarity. Eleanor turned toward him. Clarity for what James did not respond. Because he did not yet know, Kaylee returned to her room after speaking with James. She did not feel victorious. She felt alignment tightening. Her phone buzzed again. An email from Daniel. Temporary legal separation filing submitted to county clerk. Effective immediately upon service. Kaylee read the confirmation twice. Effective immediately. It was not a declaration of divorce. It was a boundary. She placed her notebook on the desk and wrote May 23rd, temporary legal separation filed. Below it, she added one more line. Not retaliation, protection. Outside traffic continued its endless rhythm. Inside the Whitmore house, tension would be rising. Eleanor would interpret filings as attack. Vanessa would interpret them as threat. James would interpret them as betrayal. Kaylee understood something else. Paper trails do not shout. They align. And once aligned, they become difficult to dismantle. She turned off the lamp and lay back against the pillows, one hand resting over the steady rise of her abdomen. The baby moved responsive to nothing but biology. That too was structure. And structure she knew now was stronger than proximity. Vanessa Caldwell moved into the Whitmore house on a Thursday afternoon. The transition was executed with efficiency that suggested prior rehearsal. 2 rolling suitcases, 3 garment bags, a banker's box labeled Caldwell Consulting LLC in clean black ink. Eleanor supervised from the foyer. The guest suite will be temporary, she said, though her tone implied arrangement rather than accommodation. You'll need privacy to focus. Vanessa inclined her head modestly. I don't want to complicate things. You're stabilizing them, Eleanor corrected. James stood halfway up the staircase, hands resting on the banister. He had returned early from the city, unsettled by the legal separation notice that had arrived by courier that morning. Temporary legal separation. Effective immediately. The language was sterile, impersonal, final without being absolute. He had read it 3 times. She didn't even talk to me first, he said now, more to himself than to either woman. Eleanor turned sharply. She spoke through counsel. That tells you everything. Vanessa closed her suitcase and looked up gently. Sometimes when someone feels cornered, they escalate. Cornered. James felt the word catch somewhere uncomfortable. He had not intended for Kaylee to feel cornered. He had intended for conflict to dissipate on its own. Upstairs, in what had once been Kaylee's reading room, Vanessa began arranging her files. Her presence altered the acoustics of the house. The echo felt different. Eleanor walked through the nursery that evening, assessing the arrangement Kaylee had restored before leaving. She did not touch anything. But her silence was not approval. Meanwhile, Kaylee spent the afternoon with Daniel Harper reviewing a secondary clause within Victoria Ford's trust. The child protection provision is robust, Daniel explained, sliding a bound copy of the trust across the table. In the event of marital dissolution or coercive circumstances, assets designated for your biological child cannot be accessed or leveraged by external parties. Define coercive, Kaylee said. Daniel did not hesitate. Financial pressure, emotional intimidation, attempts to compel disclosure. Kaylee absorbed that. Eleanor's insistence on transparency had not been about mutual understanding. It had been about control of information. Additionally, Daniel continued the trust includes a governance mechanism. If your well-being is demonstrably compromised by external interference, certain holdings shift into a protective shell automatically. Kaylee looked up. Has that been triggered? Daniel's eyes met hers steadily. The public expulsion and subsequent communications have initiated review. Review, not retaliation, not attack, procedure. Kaylee closed the trust document carefully. Do not disclose scale, Daniel added. Not yet. She nodded. That evening, James attempted to call again. Kaylee let it go to voicemail. His message was shorter this time. Mom says if you're planning something bigger, we deserve to know. Deserve. Kaylee replayed the word slowly. Deserve what information control access. She did not respond. Instead, she opened the digital folder labeled Financial Transfers and reviewed the certified statements once more. The pattern extended beyond restaurant bills and consulting transfers. There were subtle reallocations within the Whitmore family trust, small percentages redirected timing suspiciously aligned with her visit to Harrison and Blythe. Eleanor had been moving assets, perhaps not illegally, but defensively. Kaylee forwarded the updated analysis to Daniel with a single line. Please confirm if this indicates anticipatory restructuring. Daniel replied within the hour. Yes. And it strengthens your position. Strengthen. Kaylee rested her hand over her abdomen. The baby shifted again, steady rhythmic. At the Whitmore house, dinner was quieter than usual. Vanessa prepared a light meal, presenting it as hospitality. I thought it might ease tension, she said softly. Eleanor approved of the gesture. James picked at his food. She's not irrational, he said suddenly. Kaylee doesn't escalate without reason. Eleanor placed her fork down precisely. She is influenced. By who? External counsel? Outside money? Ambition? James looked up sharply. She's never been ambitious about money. Eleanor's gaze sharpened. That you know of. Vanessa spoke gently. Financial inheritance can change perspective. James frowned. You don't even know what it is. That's the issue, Eleanor replied. Secrecy erodes trust. James stood abruptly and left the table. Upstairs, he opened his laptop and searched for Harrison and Blythe LLP. He found limited information, high-profile estate management, discreet clientele. Nothing revealing. His phone buzzed. An email from Daniel Harper's office. Request for documentation, Caldwell Consulting LLC services rendered, and reimbursement justification. James stared at the screen. Vanessa knocked softly and entered. What is it? She asked. He turned the laptop toward her. They're asking for records. Vanessa's expression remained composed. Then we provide them. Were the transfers properly categorized? He asked quietly. Vanessa paused for half a second too long. They were business expenses. James studied her face. For sure, yes. But doubt had already taken root. Back in the hotel room, Kaylee reviewed prenatal appointment reminders. She scheduled the next visit and added a note, attend alone. She had stopped expecting James to protect her from Eleanor's interventions. Now she focused on protecting herself. Naomi visited again, bringing homemade soup. You're trending toward legal chess, Master, Naomi observed. Kaylee smiled faintly. I am trending toward documentation. Naomi sat across from her. Do you miss him? Kaylee considered the question carefully. I miss who he could have been, she answered. That's not the same. No. Her phone vibrated again. This time, it was a notification from Daniel. Protective governance provision officially activated pending final review. Kaylee read the message twice. Activated. The mechanism Victoria Ford had designed years ago was now operational. Not visible, not announced, but active. At the Whitmore house, Eleanor began making calls to her own attorney. She framed the situation as precautionary. She's involving outside counsel aggressively, Eleanor said into the phone. We need to protect family assets. Family assets. The irony was structural. Vanessa stood near the staircase listening. She sensed shift. Not loud, not explosive, but directional. James sat alone in his office staring at the 3 voicemail files Kaylee had not answered. He replayed his own words. Don't make this bigger than it is. He was beginning to understand that size was no longer determined by emotion. It was determined by evidence. Kaylee closed her notebook that night and turned off the bedside lamp. The interstate lights below moved in continuous lines. Inside the Whitmore house, proximity had replaced partnership. Inside the hotel rooms, distance had created clarity. They believed she had been removed from power. They did not yet understand that power had been relocated quietly and secured. The voicemail arrived at 11:47 p.m. Kaylee had already turned off the bedside lamp and was reviewing prenatal breathing exercises in the quiet of the hotel room when her phone vibrated across the desk. Unknown number. She let it ring once, twice. Then it stopped. A moment later, the voicemail notification appeared. She did not play it immediately. Instead, she opened her notebook and wrote, May 27th, 11:47 p.m., unknown caller. Voicemail left. Only then did she press play. Eleanor's voice filled the room. I will not have my son dragged through public embarrassment because you've chosen to escalate. If you continue this legal theater, there will be consequences. A pause. You are not entitled to dismantle what this family has built. The message ended without goodbye. Kaylee replayed it once more, this time with her phone connected to her laptop, ensuring a backup copy saved automatically to encrypted storage. She did not react emotionally. She labeled the file Eleanor_threat_tone_05-27.wav. Then she forwarded it to Daniel Harper with a single sentence. Received tonight at 11:47 p.m. Daniel responded within 20 minutes. This strengthens protective filing. Do not respond directly. Kaylee closed her laptop and sat very still. Threats rarely announce themselves as threats. They present as warnings, as guidance, as preservation of dignity. But the word consequences lingered. The following morning, Naomi texted her. Heard there was noise at the hospital about that day. Kaylee called her. Naomi answered immediately. Security reviewed the lobby footage because of a complaint. Naomi said, your mother-in-law was clearly the aggressor. Is the footage retrievable? Kaylee asked calmly. Yes, but only through formal request. Kaylee opened her email again. Subject, formal request. St. Matthew's CCTV. Fax only. Public removal. Verbal intimidation. Date and approximate time included. Daniel replied that he would initiate the request through proper channels. By afternoon, another development unfolded. A nurse who had been present in the maternity wing that day contacted Naomi, who then contacted Kaylee. She remembers you, Naomi said. 7 months pregnant, holding an ultrasound envelope. Kaylee nodded, though Naomi could not see her. Would she provide a statement, Kaylee asked. I think so. Kaylee wrote it down. Potential witness Nurse A lobby present. Meanwhile, at the Whitmore house, the voicemail had not gone unnoticed. Eleanor sat in her sitting room, reviewing the legal separation filing again, irritation tightening her posture. She's manufacturing evidence, she told her attorney over speakerphone. You left a voicemail, the attorney asked. Yes, I expressed concern. Concern can be construed as intimidation if phrased poorly. Eleanor stiffened. I do not intimidate. Silence lingered on the line. Vanessa stood near the doorway, listening. James entered midway through the call. Mom, did you call her last night? He asked. Eleanor muted the speaker. I handled a matter directly. James's jaw tightened. What did you say? That she should reconsider this path? James exhaled sharply. You're making it worse. Eleanor's eyes flashed. Worse than what a wife who files separation without consultation. She's not irrational, James said again, though the conviction sounded thinner than before. Vanessa intervened gently. If there's audio, it will be contextualized, she offered. We simply frame it as emotional strain. Frame. The word hung heavy. Back at the hotel, Kaylee received Daniel's update. We will amend filing to include intimidation component. Additionally, mediation request scheduled. Kaylee read the word mediation carefully. A structured environment, supervised dialogue, evidence admissible. She closed her notebook and prepared for her prenatal appointment the next morning. At St. Matthew's Hospital, the atmosphere felt different, familiar, witnessed. Naomi met her in the lobby. Security has preserved the footage, Naomi said quietly. Your attorney's office confirmed retrieval request. Kaylee nodded. They walked toward the elevator together. "You're very calm," Naomi observed. "I am aligned," Kaylee corrected softly. During the examination, the baby's heartbeat sounded stronger than before. Consistent, measured. Afterward, Kaylee requested a full copy of her medical records to date. The receptionist hesitated only briefly before complying. Documentation. When she stepped back into the lobby, she noticed a subtle shift in staff demeanor. Recognition. Witnesses remember tone. James called again that afternoon. This time Kaylee answered. Kaylee. His voice was strained. Mom didn't mean it like that. She said there would be consequences. She was emotional. She was deliberate. Silence stretched. "There's a mediation request," James said finally. "My attorney received it." "Yes. You're turning this into a case." Kaylee inhaled slowly. "It became a case the moment I was asked to leave publicly." James lowered his voice. Vanessa says Kaylee interrupted gently. "I am not discussing Vanessa." Another silence. "What do you want?" he asked. Kaylee considered the question carefully. "Stability," she answered. "That's what we're trying to protect." "From me?" she asked softly. He had no answer that felt honest. That evening, Daniel called personally. "The CCTV footage confirms verbal expulsion," he said. "Audio is limited, but body language is clear. Nurse statement forthcoming." Kaylee listened without visible reaction. "This strengthens your position considerably in mediation," Daniel added, "particularly given pregnancy." Kaylee looked out the hotel window at the endless flow of headlights. "I am not seeking advantage," she said. "I know," Daniel replied. "But you are establishing fact." "Fact." It was always about fact. At the Whitmore house, Eleanor's composure had begun to fracture. Her attorney advised caution. Further direct contact could jeopardize property leverage, he warned. Property leverage. The phrase irritated her. She had never considered her actions leverage. She considered them correction. Vanessa approached her carefully. "We need to anticipate the trust," Vanessa said. "You don't even know what it contains," Eleanor snapped. "No," Vanessa agreed evenly. "But neither do you." James sat alone in his office that night, replaying the voicemail his mother had left. He had accessed Kaylee's forwarded file through his attorney. He listened to Eleanor's voice, controlled, firm, unmistakable. Consequences. For the first time, doubt shifted direction. Kaylee turned off the lights in her room and rested her hand over her abdomen once more. Evidence now existed beyond her notebook. Audio, video, witness statements. She had not raised her voice once. She had not posted a single accusation publicly. She had only preserved. They believed escalation meant aggression. They were wrong. Escalation in Kaylee's hands meant documentation reaching its natural conclusion. And conclusion was approaching. The mediation notice arrived on a Monday morning. It was delivered simultaneously to Harrison and Blythe, to James's newly retained attorney, and to Eleanor's counsel. The language was restrained. Petitioner Kaylee Ford. Respondent James Whitmore. Subject: temporary legal separation, financial clarification, protective boundaries. Kaylee read the notice twice, not because she was uncertain, but because precision mattered. Daniel Harper had insisted on tone. "We are not accusing infidelity," he had explained. "We are not alleging criminal conduct. We are establishing financial irregularities and documented intimidation during pregnancy." Kaylee appreciated that distinction. The difference between attack and structure was subtle but decisive. She arrived at Daniel's office that afternoon to review the amended filing, which now included certified bank statements showing transfers to Caldwell Consulting, LLC. Property title restructuring initiated by Eleanor following estate activation. Voicemail recording referencing consequences. Preliminary witness confirmation from St. Matthew's Hospital. Daniel turned his monitor slightly toward her. "We will request temporary financial restraint," he said, "meaning no further asset transfers without joint acknowledgement." Kaylee nodded. "And custody provisions?" she asked quietly. Preliminary protection only, Daniel replied. Given you are 7 months pregnant, courts prioritize stability. Stability. The word returned again and again, each time with different ownership. Eleanor had used it to justify control. Kaylee now used it to justify boundary. Back at the Whitmore house, Eleanor reacted to the mediation notice with visible offense. She is formalizing what should be private, she said sharply, pacing across the sitting room. James sat rigidly on the sofa, the legal packet resting in his hands. She's asking for explanations, he said quietly. She's accusing us, Eleanor corrected. No, James replied, surprising himself. She's asking for documentation. Eleanor turned toward him. You sound like her attorney. Vanessa stood near the window, arms crossed lightly. Documentation isn't an accusation, Vanessa said carefully. It's positioning. Eleanor's gaze snapped toward her. And what position are we in? Vanessa hesitated, unprepared. The word landed heavier than anyone expected. James leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Were the transfers to your company fully reimbursed? He asked Vanessa directly. Vanessa maintained composure. Yes, then we produce receipts, James said. Eleanor watched the shift in him, small but present. In the hotel room, Kaylee reviewed the certified statements again. Daniel had highlighted specific sequences. Transfer to Caldwell Consulting, LLC, $8,500. Property tax shift, Whitmore residence. Line of credit increase under James's name. When viewed in isolation, each could be explained. Together they formed intent. Kaylee opened her notebook. May 31st, mediation scheduled. Financial restraint requested. She paused, then added, maintain tone. No emotional response. Her phone vibrated, an unfamiliar number. She answered cautiously. Miss Ford, this is Nurse Allison from St. Matthew S. I was present in the lobby that day. Kaylee sat straighter. Yes, I've submitted a written statement confirming that your mother-in-law instructed you to leave while you were visibly pregnant. I'm sorry that happened. Kaylee closed her eyes briefly. Thank you for documenting it, she said. It felt wrong, the nurse replied softly, especially in that setting. When the call ended, Kaylee forwarded the confirmation to Daniel. Witness statement received. Daniel's reply was brief. Strong addition. At the Whitmore house, Eleanor's attorney delivered unwelcome advice. Given the audio recording and witness corroboration, I recommend measured engagement during mediation, he said over speakerphone. Measured, Eleanor repeated sharply. Yes. Avoid confrontational posture. I do not posture. The attorney paused before responding. Your voicemail suggests otherwise. Eleanor ended the call abruptly. James watched her in silence. Mom, he said carefully, maybe we should just explain the transfers. Eleanor faced him squarely. And concede that your wife can destabilize this family whenever she wishes. James felt the word destabilize lose clarity. Was Kaylee destabilizing, or had something else shifted first? Vanessa intervened gently. If the trust is substantial, she said, choosing each word, we need to understand exposure. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Exposure to what? To her independence. The silence that followed was telling. Independence. The word had never been welcomed in that house. Meanwhile, Kaylee received an update from Daniel that afternoon. Temporary financial restraint approved pending mediation. She read the sentence twice. Approved. It meant no further transfers, no sudden restructuring, no quiet movement of assets without record. She placed her hand over her abdomen again. The baby moved responsive to nothing but internal rhythm. Later that evening, James appeared at the hotel again, but this time he did not request to come upstairs. He waited in the lobby, seated alone. Kaylee descended calmly. He looked tired. I listened to the voicemail, he said. Kaylee nodded. She shouldn't have said that. No, Kaylee agreed. He exhaled slowly. Why didn't you tell me about the trust? The question arrived at last. Kaylee held his gaze. Because information in this house does not stay neutral. James flinched slightly. You think I would have. I think she interrupted softly that you would have told your mother. Silence confirmed it. How big is it? He asked finally. Kaylee did not answer. It's significant, she said instead. He stared at her. Significant like? Enough, she replied calmly. James sat back processing. Mom thinks you're leveraging it. Kaylee's expression did not change. I have not leveraged anything. But you could, yes. The honesty unsettled him more than denial would have. Are you going to? He asked. Kaylee's voice remained steady. I'm going to protect my child. The simplicity of that answer left no room for debate. Back at the Whitmore house, Vanessa closed the door to the guest suite and sat alone for the first time since moving in. She opened her laptop and reviewed the legal notice again. Temporary separation, financial restraint, witness statements. She understood markets. She understood risk. And she recognized that risk had shifted, not away from Kaylee, toward the Whitmore name. Eleanor remained certain that control could be reasserted through composure. James remained uncertain where loyalty ended and accountability began. Kaylee remained still. Documentation had accumulated. Audio, video, bank records, witness statements, financial restraint orders. Each piece alone was moderate. Together they formed gravity, and gravity does not argue. It pulls. Mediation was scheduled for the following week. Kaylee closed her notebook and turned off the light. Outside, the interstate moved without pause. Inside, momentum had already changed direction. They believed they were defending legacy. They did not yet understand that legacy was now on record. The mediation session was scheduled for 9:00 a.m. in a private conference suite on the 23rd floor of a neutral office tower in Manhattan. Neutral territory. That was the point. No marble floors, no portraits of Whitmore ancestors, no hospital lobby. Just a long, polished table filtered daylight through tinted glass, and a court-appointed mediator named Sandra Klein, measured experienced, immune to theatrics. Kaylee arrived with Daniel Harper 10 minutes early. She wore a simple charcoal maternity dress and low heels. No jewelry beyond her wedding band. Her hair was pulled back neatly. Her notebook rested inside a slim leather folder. Structure. Across town, James entered the building with Eleanor and their attorney. Vanessa did not attend officially, though. She waited in the lobby cafe downstairs. James noticed that. He said nothing. Inside the conference room, introductions were brief. Sandra Klein's voice was calm. This is not a courtroom, she began. This is an opportunity to clarify positions and avoid unnecessary escalation. Kaylee listened without interruption. Daniel placed a thin stack of organized documents in front of him. James's attorney mirrored the gesture. Eleanor sat upright, hands folded, expression composed. The mediator turned to Kaylee first. Mrs. Ford Kaylee corrected gently, for documentation purposes. Sandra nodded. Miss Ford, please state your objective. Kaylee did not glance at James before answering. Stability during pregnancy, financial clarity, formal boundaries to prevent further interference. Her tone was even. No accusation, no embellishment. Sandra turned to James. Mr. Whitmore. James hesitated. I want my wife home, he said. Kaylee did not react visibly. Eleanor interjected. She left voluntarily. Daniel slid a document forward. Public expulsion witnessed at St. Matthew's Hospital, he said calmly. Security footage and written statement included. Sandra reviewed the summary briefly. Eleanor's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Sandra looked at James again. Were you present at that time? Yes, James admitted quietly. And did you object to your wife being asked to leave? Silence filled the room. I didn't think it would escalate, he said finally. Sandra made a note. Daniel continued. We are not alleging abuse, he clarified. We are establishing pattern. He presented the certified bank statements. Transfers to Caldwell Consulting LLC, highlighted in yellow. James's attorney leaned forward. These were reimbursable business expenses. Daniel nodded. We welcome documentation. He slid a second page across the table. However, 3 transfers occurred prior to reimbursement filing and were drawn directly from the joint marital account. Sandra looked at James. "Did your spouse consent to those transfers?" James swallowed. "I didn't think consent," Sandra repeated gently. "No," he said. Eleanor shifted in her seat. "These are minor amounts," she said sharply. "Irrelevant compared to—" She stopped herself. Too late. Sandra's eyes flicked upward. "Compared to what Mrs. Whitmore," Eleanor recovered quickly. "Compared to overall family assets." Daniel's expression did not change. "Family assets are not under review today," he said calmly. "Marital conduct is." Kaylee watched without expression. Structure was unfolding exactly as anticipated. Sandra turned to the voicemail transcript next. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said evenly, "did you state there would be consequences?" If Miss Ford continued legal proceedings, Eleanor's composure remained intact. "I expressed concern for the family's reputation." "Is that your voice on the recording?" "Yes." Sandra nodded once. "Context matters," Eleanor added. "It does," Sandra agreed. "And context during pregnancy is particularly relevant." Silence returned. James shifted uncomfortably. Daniel placed one final document on the table. Additionally, he said property tax payments for the Whitmore residence were restructured immediately following Miss Ford's estate verification appointment. James looked at his mother. Eleanor's expression hardened. "That is prudent financial management." Sandra glanced at Kaylee. "Were you informed of this restructuring?" "No." Kaylee replied calmly. "Were you consulted?" "No." Sandra folded her hands. "Then we have a documented pattern of financial decisions made unilaterally." Eleanor leaned forward slightly. "This is absurd. She's isolating my son with legal maneuvering." Kaylee spoke for the first time since the evidence presentation. "I did not isolate him," she said evenly. "I requested documentation." Sandra held Eleanor's gaze. "Mrs. Whitmore mediation requires restraint." Eleanor leaned back. James exhaled slowly, as if something inside him was finally aligning with what had been laid out plainly in black and white. Sandra addressed Kaylee again. "Miss Ford, are you seeking divorce?" "No," Kaylee said. "I am seeking boundary. And if boundary is respected, I will evaluate stability at that time." Her answers were measured, unemotional, precise. Sandra nodded. "Temporary orders will remain in place," she said finally. "No further financial transfers. Communication through counsel only regarding assets. Residence discussion deferred pending additional review." She looked directly at James. "Mr. Whitmore, you may not unilaterally reposition property during separation." James nodded. Sandra turned to Eleanor. "And you are not a party to this marriage." Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. The session concluded without raised voices. No dramatic confrontation. No accusations of infidelity. Just record. As they exited the conference room, James walked beside Kaylee in the hallway. "I didn't realize it looked like that on paper," he said quietly. Kaylee stopped near the elevator. "It wasn't about appearance," she replied. "It was about pattern." He looked at her searching. "Why didn't you just tell me how much the trust was worth?" Kaylee's gaze remained steady. "Because value changes behavior." James flinched slightly. "Do you think I would change?" She did not answer immediately. I think she said finally that pressure reveals structure. The elevator doors opened. They stepped inside separately. Downstairs in the lobby cafe, Vanessa looked up as James exited the building. His face carried something new. Not anger, not denial, recognition. Eleanor followed moments later, posture rigid. "This is not over," she said quietly. No one argued. Back in the hotel room that evening, Kaylee placed her notebook on the desk and wrote June 4th, mediation complete. Financial restraint upheld. Pattern established. She paused, then added, "No raised voice required." She closed the notebook and rested her hand over her abdomen once more. The baby moved in steady rhythm. Structure was holding. They had believed confrontation would require volume. It had required documentation. And documentation had begun to tilt the balance. The next phase would not be louder. It would be clearer. James learned the full scale of the trust 3 days after mediation. Not from Kaylee, not from Eleanor, but from his own attorney. They were seated in a modest conference room downtown, the blinds partially drawn against afternoon glare. A folder lay open on the table between them, documents Daniel Harper's office had been required to disclose. In limited form, under procedural transparency rules. "Your wife is the sole beneficiary of the Victoria Ford Living Trust," his attorney said evenly. "Estimated current valuation, approximately $36.8 billion. James did not speak. The number felt unreal, not because of greed, but because of its magnitude. It dwarfed the Whitmore estate. It reframed every argument his mother had made about legacy and preservation. "She didn't tell me," he said quietly. "She was not obligated to," the attorney replied. James leaned back in his chair. "Does my mother know?" "Not the scale." Silence stretched. "If this proceeds to divorce," the attorney continued, "the trust is structured to remain insulated. It is separate property, particularly given the protective clauses involving your unborn child." James absorbed that. Insulated, separate, protected, so none of it? He stopped. "Correct," the attorney said calmly. "None of it becomes marital asset unless commingled intentionally." James stared at the folder. For the first time, he saw clearly what Kaylee had understood from the beginning. Information in his house was not neutral. If she had disclosed the number the day she heard it, his mother would have mobilized instantly. Control would have escalated. Pressure would have intensified. And perhaps the expulsion would have come sooner. He left the office in silence. Meanwhile, Eleanor sat in her study, reviewing updated financial statements of the Whitmore holdings. She sensed shift without knowing its shape. Vanessa entered without knocking. "You look unsettled?" Vanessa observed gently. "I am assessing exposure," Eleanor replied. To what, Vanessa asked? To unpredictability. Vanessa hesitated. "Do you think she has more than we assumed?" Eleanor's jaw tightened. It would explain the audacity. Vanessa lowered herself into a chair opposite her. "If the scale is significant, your approach may need adjustment." "I do not adjust to manipulation," Eleanor snapped. Vanessa held her gaze steadily. "Then you may miscalculate." Upstairs, James stood in the nursery doorway. The crib remained exactly where Kaylee had placed it. Sunlight filtered through the lighter curtains she had chosen before Eleanor replaced them. Curtains Eleanor had quietly removed again after mediation, restoring Kaylee's original selection without comment. James noticed that detail. Small concessions, silent corrections. He took out his phone and dialed Kaylee. This time she answered. "Yes, I need to see you," he said. There was no hesitation in her voice. "Tomorrow. Public place." He almost smiled at the phrasing. "Okay." They met the next afternoon at a quiet cafe midway between Manhattan and Westchester. Neutral ground again. Kaylee arrived, first notebook in her bag, but unopened. James sat across from her, studying her face as if recalibrating. "I know," he said. Kaylee did not ask what he meant. "The trust," he continued. "I know how much it is." She nodded once. "And you didn't tell me?" "No." Why? Kaylee met his gaze steadily. "Because disclosure would not have remained between us." James inhaled slowly. "You think I would have told my mother?" "Yes." The honesty was not accusatory. It was observational. He looked down at his hands. "I didn't protect you," he admitted quietly. Kaylee did not respond immediately. She allowed the statement to settle between them. "When I was asked to leave," she said calmly, "you asked for time." James swallowed. "I didn't think she would go that far." "She did." "Yes." Silence lingered. "Is that why you filed?" he asked. "I filed because documentation required structure," she replied. James leaned back. "I thought you were escalating. I was preserving." He studied her carefully. "Are you planning to divorce me?" Kaylee rested her hand lightly over her abdomen. I am planning to evaluate stability after our child is born. And what determines stability? Boundaries respected, she answered. Transparency without coercion. Independence without retaliation. James absorbed the words. And if I choose you over my mother? He asked quietly. Kaylee did not flinch. This is not a competition. It feels like one. It is not, she repeated calmly. It is alignment. James let out a slow breath. I didn't see the pattern until mediation, he admitted. On paper, it looked different. Paper clarifies, Kaylee said. He hesitated before asking the question that lingered beneath all others. Are you going to use it, the money? Kaylee considered the question carefully. I'm going to use it to secure my child's future, she said. Against me, if necessary. The words were not hostile. They were structural. James felt something inside him shift, not resentment, but recognition. He had believed that power lived in proximity, in shared space, in his mother's approval. He was beginning to understand that a power also lived in restraint, in documentation, in patience. I didn't know how to stand up to her, he said finally. Kaylee's expression softened slightly, but not enough to blur clarity. That is not my responsibility. Back at the Whitmore house, Eleanor received a call from her attorney. The trust valuation has been confirmed, he said. Eleanor's grip tightened on the phone. How much, he told her. Silence filled the study. That is significant, she said slowly. Yes, and insulated, yes. Eleanor stared at the portrait of her late husband on the wall. For the first time, the Whitmore estate felt comparatively fragile. Vanessa entered moments later. Eleanor did not look at her. She is not a liability, Eleanor said quietly. She never was, Vanessa replied. Eleanor turned sharply. She is a threat. Vanessa shook her head slightly. She is independent. The distinction lingered in the air. That evening, James returned to the Whitmore house with a decision forming not fully articulated, but present. He walked into the sitting room where Eleanor waited. You knew she was separating finances because you were repositioning property, he said calmly. Eleanor stiffened. I was protecting this family. From what? From being destabilized. James held her gaze. Or from losing control. The question landed heavier than accusation. Eleanor did not answer immediately, because somewhere beneath composure, she recognized the shift. Kaylee, alone in her hotel room that night, wrote in her notebook June 7th. James informed of trust scale. Acknowledged failure to protect. She paused, then added, clarity changes posture. She closed the notebook and turned off the light. Outside, the interstate continued its steady flow. Inside the Whitmore house, legacy was being recalculated. Not in dollars, in alignment. They had believed money would provoke arrogance. Instead, it had produced distance. And distance had revealed structure. The hearing was not dramatic. There were no raised voices, no spectators, no reporters. Just a family court judge, 2 legal teams, a court clerk, and the quiet gravity of documentation assembled over weeks. Kaylee arrived with Daniel Harper precisely on time. 7 months and 3 weeks pregnant, composed. Her posture, upright movements, deliberate but unhurried. James sat at the opposite table beside his attorney. Eleanor was not permitted to sit at counsel table but occupied a seat behind him, posture rigid. Vanessa was absent entirely. The judge, a woman in her late 50s with measured eyes and a reputation for precision, reviewed the summary briefs and saw in silence before speaking. This is a hearing on temporary orders related to marital separation, financial restraint, and protective boundaries during pregnancy, she began. Her voice was steady, neutral. Daniel rose first. Your Honor, we are not seeking punitive action, he said. We are requesting continued financial restraint recognition of documented unilateral transfers and enforcement of communication boundaries given prior intimidation. He did not embellish. He presented exhibits, certified bank statements, transfer logs to Caldwell Consulting LLC, voicemail transcript, CCTV still images from St. Matthew's Hospital. Written witness statement from Nurse Allison. Each document was numbered, time-stamped. This was to James watched the images projected on the courtroom screen. The still frame of the hospital lobby captured Kaylee standing with her ultrasound envelope clutched to her coat. Eleanor's posture angled forward. His own expression caught mid-confusion. He had never seen it from that distance. The judge turned to James's attorney. Response: the attorney stood. Your Honor, my client does not dispute that certain transfers occurred. However, they were business-related and reimbursable. There was no intent to defraud. The judge nodded slightly. Intent is not currently the issue. Consent is. The attorney shifted. There was no explicit objection at the time. Daniel responded calmly. Because there was no disclosure at the time. Silence settled. The judge made a note, and the voicemail she asked. James's attorney hesitated. Emotional context during family stress. The judge pressed a button on her desk. The audio played. Eleanor's voice filled the room. If you continue this legal theater, there will be consequences. The courtroom felt smaller afterward. The judge's expression did not change. She turned toward Eleanor. Mrs. Whitmore, you are not a party to this marriage. Why were you directly threatening the petitioner? Eleanor rose without being asked, composure intact. I was expressing concern for my son. The judge studied her. Concern does not require consequences. Eleanor did not respond. The judge shifted focus back to Kaylee. Miss Ford, she said evenly, what are you seeking long-term? Kaylee stood. She did not glance at Eleanor. I am seeking stability for my child, she said, and clarity in financial and residential boundaries until that stability is assured. Her tone remained even. No accusation, no visible anger. Are you seeking divorce? The judge asked. Not at this time, Kaylee replied. Do you believe reconciliation is possible? Kaylee paused. I believe alignment is required. The judge inclined her head slightly. That is not a legal term, she said. No, Kaylee agreed. But it determines whether stability exists. James felt the weight of that answer more than any accusation could have delivered. The judge reviewed the bank statements again. Mr. Whitmore, she said, did you consult your spouse before transferring funds from the joint account to Caldwell Consulting LLC? James stood. No. Did you inform her after the transfers? No. Did you provide documentation upon request? I delayed. The judge nodded once. And are you aware that unilateral financial movement during pregnancy can be interpreted as destabilizing? Yes, Your Honor. Do you dispute the public expulsion occurred? James swallowed. No. The judge leaned back slightly. Temporary financial restraint remains in effect. No asset repositioning without joint consent or court approval. Communication between parties shall occur through counsel for financial matters. Residential access to the marital home is suspended pending further review. Eleanor inhaled sharply. The judge turned toward her. You will refrain from direct contact unless invited by the petitioner. Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. Yes, Your Honor. The judge concluded calmly. This court prioritizes stability for the unborn child. Emotional disputes are secondary to structural integrity. Structural integrity. The phrase lingered. The hearing ended without spectacle. No gavel slam, no visible collapse. Just order. In the hallway outside the courtroom, James stood beside Kaylee for a brief moment before their attorneys separated them for procedural discussion. I didn't fight you, he said quietly. I noticed she replied. He looked at her carefully. Is that good? It is accurate, she said. Eleanor approached, then ignoring the court's earlier warning about distance. You've humiliated this family, she said in a low voice. Kaylee met her gaze calmly. I have documented it. Eleanor's composure faltered for the first time. This isn't over. No. Kaylee agreed softly. It is structured. Daniel stepped between them gently but firmly. Mrs. Whitmore, further direct engagement will be recorded. Eleanor stepped back. James watched the exchange in silence. For the first time, he saw the dynamic from outside it. not mother versus wife, control versus boundary. In the days that followed, the Whitmore house felt quieter. Vanessa began limiting her visits. The financial restraint order restricted further transfers. Property titles could not be repositioned without scrutiny. Eleanor remained composed but reduced her calls to attorneys. James visited the nursery alone one evening and stood in the doorway. The room felt different now, not because Kaylee was absent, but because the illusion of control had shifted. He picked up the crib rail and noticed the slight indentation where Kaylee's hand had once steadied it. Structure. He understood now that she had not raised her voice once. She had not shamed him publicly. She had not exposed Vanessa. She had not weaponized the trust. She had simply documented. And documentation had altered power. That night, Kaylee returned to the hotel and wrote June 14th temporary orders affirmed. Financial restraint enforced. Residential access suspended. She paused, then added, no humiliation required. She closed the notebook and rested her hand over her abdomen once more. The baby moved steadily. Inside her, there was no court order, no financial restraint, just life. Outside, Legacy was recalibrating under legal supervision. They had believed power required volume. Instead, it required paper, and paper had spoken. The baby arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning. No announcements, no Whitmore family gathering in a private hospital suite. Just Kaylee Naomi at her side and a delivery nurse who spoke in low, steady tones. James was notified after the contractions had already stabilized into rhythm. He arrived before the final hour breathless but composed and stood near Kaylee's shoulder without speaking. She did not ask him to leave. She did not ask him to stay. When their daughter cried for the first time, the sound cut through everything that had preceded it. Bank statements, courtrooms, voicemail threats. Life had entered the room, indifferent to Legacy. Kaylee held her daughter against her chest and felt something settle into permanence. Not triumph, not relief. Alignment. James looked at the child in Kaylee's arms and understood with painful clarity what had been at stake all along. Not money, not reputation, structure. 2 days later, Daniel Harper visited the hospital room with a thin portfolio. Routine confirmations, he said quietly. Kaylee signed updated trust designations, naming her daughter primary beneficiary after her. The protective clauses activated automatically. Insulated, secure. James watched from the window. He did not ask about amounts. He asked instead, what does she need? Kaylee looked down at their daughter. Stability, she said. The word felt different now, less defensive, more foundational. Eleanor requested visitation through counsel. The court permitted limited supervised contact. When Eleanor entered the hospital room for the first time, her posture remained upright, but something in her composure had shifted. She looked at the child with visible calculation and something else beneath it. You've named her, she asked. Clara Victoria Kaylee replied. Victoria. Eleanor's eyes flickered briefly. James noticed. Clara's fingers curled instinctively around Kaylee's index finger. Eleanor extended her hand cautiously but did not touch. The room was quiet. No confrontation, no apology, just distance measured in inches. I hope, Eleanor said carefully, that we can move forward. Kaylee met her gaze calmly. Forward requires boundary. Eleanor did not argue, because boundary was now court-enforced. In the weeks that followed, the temporary orders transitioned into formal separation terms. James moved out of the Whitmore house into a smaller apartment closer to Manhattan. He did not move in with Vanessa. Vanessa, sensing the shift months earlier, had already distanced herself. Caldwell Consulting LLC dissolved quietly. There was no public scandal, no headlines, no dramatic exposure, just legal documentation concluding what emotion had begun. The Whitmore residence remained under Eleanor's control, but diminished. Without James's daily presence and without access to Clara beyond supervised visits, the house felt larger, hollowed. Kaylee did not return to it. Instead, she purchased a private townhouse in Manhattan under the trust's holding structure unremarkable from the outside. No ostentation, no announcement. Inside the nursery was arranged exactly as she had originally envisioned. Light gray curtains, oak crib positioned safely away from the window, a rocking chair chosen without consultation. James visited regularly under agreed terms. He removed his shoes at the door. He listened more than he spoke. One evening, as Clara slept between them on the couch, he asked quietly, "Did you ever want revenge?" Kaylee considered the question. "No," she said. Not even a little no. "Why?" She looked at him steadily. "Revenge is loud. Stability is permanent." James nodded slowly. He understood now that his failure had not been financial. It had been structural. He had mistaken proximity for protection, mistaken silence for weakness. He did not ask for reconciliation again. He focused instead on presence. Eleanor attempted one final maneuver 6 months later, petitioning for expanded grandparent visitation based on family legacy arguments. The court denied expansion beyond supervised terms. The judge's language was brief. Legacy does not supersede stability. Eleanor stopped filing motions after that. The trust continued operating quietly. Kaylee established the Victoria Maternal Health Initiative funding clinics in underserved communities. No press conference, no branding campaign, just grants issued. Quiet impact. When Clara turned 1, Kaylee hosted a small gathering. Naomi attended. James attended. Eleanor was invited for a limited window. She arrived punctually carrying a simple silver bracelet engraved with Clara's initials. No speech. No attempt to reclaim authority. She stood slightly apart observing. Kaylee did not humiliate her. She did not reference court orders. She did not mention the voicemail. The past existed in record, not in conversation. As guests left that evening, James lingered near the doorway. "You didn't have to let her come," he said softly. Kaylee adjusted Clara against her shoulder. "Clara deserves clarity," she replied. "And you?" he asked. Kaylee looked around the townhouse, the calm lighting the steady rhythm of a life constructed deliberately. "I already have it," she said. Later that night, after Clara slept and the house was quiet, Kaylee opened her notebook for the final time. She wrote Clara 1 year. Financial structure secure, boundary respected, no retaliation required. She paused, then added, "Silence preserved dignity." She closed the notebook and placed it in a drawer. Not hidden, not displayed, stored. Outside, Manhattan moved in its endless rhythm. Inside, the structure she had built held firm. They had believed they were removing her from power when they placed a suitcase at her feet. They had believed money would make her arrogant. They had believed humiliation would silence her. Instead, she had documented. Instead, she had structured. Instead, she had walked away with clarity intact. No raised voice, no public revenge, just alignment. And that more than $36 billion was what endured. Some victories are loud. They come with applause headlines and visible defeat on the other side. But the most enduring victories are often quiet. Kaylee never shouted. She never exposed private failures to satisfy public curiosity. She did not use wealth as a weapon or humiliation as currency. Instead, she chose documentation over drama, structure over spectacle, boundaries over revenge. There is a lesson in that restraint. When someone underestimates you, the instinct is often to prove them wrong, immediately, loudly, visibly, decisively. But real strength does not rush to perform. It prepares, it observes, it records. It waits until truth can stand on its own, without emotion having to carry it. Kaylee understood something many people learn. Too late dignity is not preserved by winning arguments. It is preserved by refusing to abandon your principles, while others abandon theirs. She did not fight to dominate. She fought to stabilize. She did not leave to punish. She left to protect. She did not speak to humiliate. She spoke when structure required it. And in doing so, she shifted power without ever raising her voice. Sometimes, the greatest act of courage is not retaliation. It is composure. It is choosing long-term integrity over short-term satisfaction. It is protecting your child, your peace, and your future, even when others mistake your silence for weakness. If this story moved you, I would truly love to hear your thoughts. What part stayed with you the most? Have you ever experienced a moment where quiet strength changed everything? Share your reflections in the comments. Your perspective might help someone else feel less alone. And if you believe that dignity, structure, and emotional resilience still matter in a noisy world, consider subscribing to the channel. There are more stories here about quiet power, the kind that doesn't shout but endures.